Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 48. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who has liked, shared, and commented. Your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. Also want to thank our sponsor, Cerberus Strength, for bringing you this episode today for free. Trusted since 2012, Cerberus is making the best strongman, powerlifting, and strength sports equipment and accessories, ensuring the ultimate competitive edge. Every one of their products is tried, tested, and proven by top-level athletes worldwide. Whether it's competing on the big stage at World's Strongest Man or training at home in the gym, Cerberus strength equipment is reliable, durable, and of course, strong enough to handle all your training goals and needs. If you're in the market for the highest quality strength conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out cerberusstrength.com and use our promo code strength_game to save on your next order. And in this week's episode, I am joined by a good friend of mine, Coach Matt Tometz. Tometz is the sports science coordinator and sports performance specialist at TC Boost Sports Performance in Northbrook, Illinois. At TC Boost, Coach Tometz works with youth, middle school, high school, and college athletes from all sports, as well as organizes the sports science efforts and experiments for the performance staff. Prior to his current position, he was a sports scientist with TCU Athletics and research assistant at the Sports Science Center at TCU. He also spent time as a youth baseball instructor for the Texas Rangers Baseball Club and equipment manager at TCU and intern at TC Boost. In addition to his coaching, Tometz is the host of the Talking Shop podcast. It's a published research author in the Journal of Strength Conditioning Research, as well as a freelance videographer, creating his own coaching education videos and content for YouTube and social media, as well as companies like 1080 Motion. Tometz is a former college baseball pitcher that saw his career go from walk-on to competing in the 2015 NCAA Division II College World Series for Truman State University. He continues to stay heavily involved in lifting and is using his own training to test out new programs, research, technologies, and ideas on himself prior to implementing those with his athletes. I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach Matt Tometz. What's going on, everybody? Today I'm joined by a good friend of mine and pretty much my intro into podcasting, he's been my go-to person for it. I got Coach Matt Tometz. What's going on, man?
Nothing much, just here making another podcast. Crazy how everything all comes together and how we met. It's funny. Andy DM'd me and said, "Hey, would you want to host my podcast?" I thought I was being pranked. And then here we are now. I hosted Nick. He was like, "Hey, you have your own? I'd love to start my own." I said, "Dude, send it." And then we had a few conversations about it, and here we are now. So it all comes full circle. Very glad to be on.
I know, it's cool. I picked your brain for a while, and I finally got to get it back and going. And we took a short break for a little bit too, just because moving cross country kind of hurts. Yeah. So trying to get back on the track. So I figured what's a better person than someone that introduced me into everything, into the podcasting world, than to get you on the show.
Flattered and humbled for sure.
Hey, so I know we talked a little bit beforehand, but for everybody else, I want to get right into it. What really got you kind of involved in the strength game and lifting? What kind of sports did you play growing up, and what's kind of led you like athletically in your career now?
Mm-hmm. So probably like most people that stumble into the weight room, I needed it as an athlete. I was not very blessed having a 4'10" mom and a 5'8" dad. And I somehow got to 6 feet. Well, I'm 5'11" and a half, but I say 6. Don't tell anyone. But, they both did high school sports, nothing beyond that. So my genes are not the most ideal, but I know how to work hard And when I have a goal, I go after it. So I was an athlete that needed the weight room and needed training to be successful. I was successful by hard work. And that started my junior year of high school. Me and my twin brother just started lifting after school. And then I decided I wanted to play college baseball, went from walk on to D2 World Series in my freshman year, had a nice little 4-year career, and the rest is history.
I know it was a pretty big like transition going right from, I think you redshirted too, right? So you went
Like the first, like 2 or 3 weeks of the season. And then a few guys got hurt. And then coach said, "Hey, you're suiting up."
there you go. That's a big welcome to college athletics right there. But
Yeah, I literally couldn't have drawn it up any other way.
no, that's pretty cool though to see kind of the evolution getting started into it and then really kind of working away and to go from walk on to going to championship game. Like that's a pretty cool thing to see the payoff. Most people don't get that opportunity. So like what are you actually doing now currently to stay kind of active and train? And I know like coming out of college, people have kind of a hard time oftentimes to like just stay active and kind of have that same camaraderie and community and just drive. But what kind of drives you to still want to challenge yourself and continue to train in the fashion you are now?
First and most importantly is keep the dad bod away, which I don't know how successful I'm doing at that, but definitely not training as much as I should. And I think that the hardest part about being a non-athlete is you don't have, like, it was just so objective having the goal of whatever I'm doing today, whatever I'm doing over the summer when I'm home, or whatever I'm doing over winter break is like, make me a better pitcher. And now it's like, oh, I haven't hit arms in a while. I guess I'll hit arms, or like probably should do a leg day. So to give myself a goal and a purpose, because as probably your listener is wired, like I have goal, I know how to get there, or I will figure it out and I will get it done. So partly just for my mental sanity to make myself into it, but also just as a coach, it's an awesome opportunity to make myself more athletic, but then also make myself a better coach. So it's a win-win. And just curiosity, I would say, just kind of putting all those things together. Not training as much as I probably should, but it's cool that I can kind of put both those things together, my career and my workouts.
For sure. I think that's definitely a good way to put it. And I feel that same way. Like when I come out of a program or even like during the move, I don't have a goal because I don't have like a competition I'm training for. I have to do all these other life things going on, and my training suffers. I do not like just working out for the sake of working
It's
out.
tough.
I like structure. I want it put together. I want to know that like what I'm doing on Monday has a purpose to what's going into Tuesday. And I don't know if that's the coach in me or if that's the laziness coming out, but I like to think it's a little bit of a healthy mix. But I need a goal. I need an objective. I hear you loud and clear for sure. But the cool thing that you kind of said, like for your training, is curiosity. And I think that's a big thing for coaches. And I think that's a cool thing because a lot of what we can do in our training is driven by like either stuff we read, stuff we see, or what we kind of want to add into a program. So what are kind of some of the practical ways that you kind of use your training to like in that curiosity to like drive how you put technology into your program? You kind of like implement new research or try like theories out on yourself so that you can kind of work your way with your athletes down the line.
So the context of where I coach at TC Boost, we're known for speed and agility development. So most things are tied back into speed and stuff like that. But myself being an ex-college pitcher, I get a lot of our baseball players and pitchers and stuff. And myself having not really thrown that hard my entire career, I used to always say, oh, well, if I knew back then what I know now, I would throw way harder. And I'm like, dang it. Now I have to know if that's true or not. Like, why did I ever say that out loud? Because I have the tools and the technology and the adult money to where I can buy a radar gun to make that happen, and So that's probably my most recent rabbit hole is my velocity one. And hands down, it's already paid dividends for sure. Because, well, first off, you're taking away all of the risk, because if you bang yourself up, I'd rather do that than bang up one of my athletes. So the biggest risk of any training, you're already somewhat addressing that. But next, you get to actually feel and quote unquote get it. Yo, I just get it. I understand. I can describe what it's supposed to feel like, what it's not supposed to feel like. When I say, oh, did you feel it here or there? It's because I actually know that those are probably the two places that they're going to feel it. And here's an example. So I did sports science for the TCU beach volleyball team. And I watched practice 6 days a week for the entire year, which was awesome. And I knew the game so well mentally, but I was so bad at playing. Like I would hop in the sand with the coaches and I would say, oh, I was supposed to pull. And the coaches were like, yeah. And I was like, but I can't do it, you know? But now, like, I understand what it's like playing in the sand and diving. Like I can speak that language with the girls because I understand it even just more than having never been in the sand at all. So it's not to say that I have to join a pickup lacrosse league because I've never played lacrosse before. But if I ask one of my athletes to bring his backup stick and we toss it around a few days a week, that's going to go an extremely long way. So I think that there's value to speak that language with your athletes. There's value to learn what it's actually like, because believe it or not, textbooks are not real life. So to read in the triphasic, so I guess next a little bit more applied, like reading triphasic, those 7-second eccentrics, that sucks, you know, and doing it yourself, it's like, okay, like I know what the textbook says, but I know what it's like in real life. And I know what I tolerate. And I know that my athletes probably aren't even going to tolerate as much as me because I'm super into this stuff. So you learn that fine line between optimal, ideal, textbook, quote unquote, and what's actually going to work in real life. And you can write a workout down for 60 minutes and then you do it for yourself and it's 90. It's like, oh man, like, well, I'd rather do that when I have nothing to lose today versus when they're paying me for just an hour and I have 3 other hours of clients. Okay, so my timing was off. All right, so so really the biggest part about experimenting is the risk, but there is no risk when you're doing it yourself. Like I recently tweaked my adductor, unfortunately, because I was just doing all this throwing stuff. Well, what happens when I tweak little Johnny's adductor and he's out for 2 or 3 months, you know? So I know I kind of bounced around with a few different anecdotes, but kind of how does all that sound?
No, that sounds great. It's I know that feeling exactly. I'd rather be my own test subject first. And obviously like that's a big thing, talking about like what's optimal and ideal versus like what you're going to see in the textbook and how that actually gets implemented in a practical setting. Like I think that's the biggest piece that we lose from a lot of like the old like exercise science, like kines, like undergrad programs, is there's not a lot of emphasis placed on application. Like there's a big disconnect from what the classroom portion looks like what the quote unquote lab portion looks like, and what people are actually going to do with that degree and like that in a career. And the lab setting really should just be more so driven towards like, are you going to do it in a clinical space? All right, this is what we're going to do. Are you going to do it in like a college, like weight room space? Then let's actually take what we're learning and put it in place. And that's another topic for another day, like how that is doing a disservice to everyone and why I wish college strength coaches and strength coaches alike didn't really need to be in debt to be in more debt as a career. But I like what you said about you don't have to be an expert. Like you didn't play college volleyball, you didn't play college lacrosse. Like you can still find some value picking up a stick or kind of getting on the court. But I've felt that exact feeling that you have when like over COVID, when I was still in California, like starting to get involved in jujitsu a little bit. And I felt so much better as soon as someone showed me it. I've talked to some other guys about it too. I can understand it. I can coach it. I know where I'm supposed to be, but I can't execute it. And I think it's a mark of a good coach usually, because we're not necessarily the best athletes, but we can demo it probably proficiently, or that's why we keep training, so that we can at least do it. Because I've usually, when you line someone up, a coach is the least athletic person in the room compared to the athletes you're actually working with.
Yeah. Hopefully.
But understanding it and being able to know what it feels like and put yourself in that situation and show the athletes how to actually do it, and let them, as the experts and the people that you're actually coaching, perform it. I think that's a great thing to be able to do, and to put yourself in those positions, I think, is huge. So we really kind of go for it
with the demonstrating stuff, because I've had the pleasure of training a kid through Zoom who's at IMG, and just like verbally trying to describe, as I can somewhat demonstrate through the computer, but like kids are just visual learners. And like being a speed and agility coach, I always say like I run okay times, but I look really good doing it, because I demonstrate technique drills 5 hours a day, 6 days a week, you know? So just to say like, hey, do it just like I'm doing it, and a really good demo versus a really bad demo are two different things. And that's going to go a huge way for your athletes and for their learning. And an example of this, I was working with a player in the WNBA, and it was our first session together. And I was like, why am I so tired? Like, I thought she was a stud. This is going to be easy. And I'm like, wait, I have to demonstrate this stuff perfectly, because she's literally going to mirror me. And so that's someone who knows what they're doing, let alone little Johnny, who's a sophomore in high school, who's halfway through a growth spurt, who doesn't know his left arm from his right arm. So I think that there's so much to be said about like, if you're like, I've never played volleyball, but if I go through a little vert program and I can demonstrate how I want them to do the penultimate step and all this stuff, versus just describing it and trying to play this, like they do a rep, I give them these like vague things that they don't understand, and they do another one, and it's just this like back and forth of them doing and I and me saying, versus I'm actually proficient in approach jumping. I'm not saying I have to touch 10-6 and do windmill dunks, but to look somewhat athletic. Like I was working last night, I was doing this backwards crossover agility cutting drill, and just me describing the step crossover cut, you know, which in my head is easy, but I just did it for him. And he's like, oh, okay, makes sense. Ice cold, nothing hurt. But because I can do that, that goes a long way for the session. So whether it's you learning what's actually realistic programming wise, or just how to ask and coach and cue, but also just to show it. So I think that there's only upsides for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like you talked about before, like speaking their language, and like the benefit of having a good demo versus a bad demo may not do much in the moment, because the athletes are going to kind of refer and go to what's natural. And if it's a bad movement, it's a bad movement. But if they're going to mirror what you're doing, like that's what the cringy old high school weight room like setting looks like, with the old guy that played football back in the day.
Oh yeah.
And going in there, and all the like young freshmen in high school are just copying what the older kids are doing, and then it just becomes a horror show. So
like imagine only being able to coach Olympic lifts with your hands behind your back.
Oh man, I did that one time in grad school. We did, I forget where we stole this coaching exercise, and we gave it, each person got to do it one day, and not hands behind their back, but one day we did not, so we didn't hurt anybody. One coach was allowed to do everything normal, and then one coach got to like actually do the teaching portion. We did one session where one of us weren't allowed to verbally communicate with the athletes at all. And then we switched, and he did the same thing. And we kind of prompted the kids to just go with it. And then the next session, one of us was not allowed to demo anything, couldn't like show any sort of like movement, like kinesthetic movement, could put our hands on anybody, like could only verbally like go through all the coaching cues. And you realize, and I didn't realize in the moment, we just thought it was hard like to not kind of do it, because you naturally, if an athlete's not responding to one sort of cue, you show them a different way, you speak it a different way, you try to find something that clicks, and then wait for them to execute it and be like, that's what it is. And you reinforce it. And I always thought that was fun, but yeah, when you take one of those cues away, you completely take a disadvantage in your ability to actually coach away. And I can only imagine how it is for some coaches that work with like paraplegic athletes or work with Special Olympics athletes. You have to be, and I mean, even in the private sector too, like you're working with some kids that their parents think they're like the next prodigy. And then there's some kids that are the next prodigy, but you get them both in the same hour on a Friday night.
It's nuts. Yeah.
You have you have to have everything come out of your pocket for that.
Yeah. Having like the 12-year-old to 18-year-old range is so interesting because they're at such different, just like biological ages and training ages. And some of them, it's their first day, who's an 8th grader who's just hopping in the high school class with no training age, cross country runner. And then I have kids that have an Olympic lifting background that are going to run track at MIT that are seniors in high school, and I have them in the same hour. It's nuts. And then like kids will go away for 3 months, being in season, and they come back and I'm like, who are you? Like puberty hits you hard. And that's only 3 months, like you look like a different person. Like there was a kid, he just came back and we hopped in the timing lasers, and he was like, don't write this down, it's going to be bad. And he PR'd. I'm like, oh, sorry, can't write it down. You said it was going to be bad. But just because he was just more mature, and after all that football, and he got a little stronger just from playing. And then it's like, this is a different conversation, but I was like, really, where is my value then if he got faster, not with me? But that's a whole conversation for a different day. But if no one's worked consistently with like 12 to 18-year-olds, it's quite the eye opener.
Yeah, I can only imagine that your testing numbers are going to be drastically different. Even probably like them coming back from vacation, like something might have just clicked. Or I mean, that demographic I haven't worked with very much, especially to the degree you have. And I can only imagine what it looks like for them coming back. Because to me, sometimes the biggest thing I see is just coming out of high school and then having a freshman that is a red shirt, like to see the progress they make, but to kind of take a step back and think that who you work with, like 12 to 18 and some of those like younger ranges, they might be having those same gains and like improvements and changes in a 1 month span, let alone a full year, like what they can turn into and the potential. And it's a big case for why high school and private sector like coaching is really the quality of athlete that I'm going to see and what I get to work with when they eventually get to college. And if they don't have that background to work with, then now, again, the disparity between the elite ones that actually know what they're doing and the ones that have never seen a barbell is different. Even though they're playing the exact same sport, they're on the same team together. That's mind blowing to me.
If anyone's familiar with Cal Dietz and Chris Corfus and the ankle rocker stuff, the ankle rocker drills, because we do that in most of our warm-ups. We have a girl who's playing hockey there, and she's a freshman. And it was like the first workout, and they were going through the ankle rocker progressions, and Cal Dietz was like, wait, how do you know how to do this stuff? And she's like, oh, we do it back where I train at home. So then she texted Steve, my colleague, that. But it does go a long way, and these kids are sponges, man. It's nuts. That's
honestly my favorite thing when I get an athlete that comes in and like has questions about, hey, why aren't we doing this? And be like, oh man, your high school has more stuff than we have, or your private facility, like they were doing it right. And I was like, all right, well, let me see what we're working with, and then we're gonna progress you pretty quick, so that I don't want to do a disservice to them. But I was like, I don't know if we have enough stuff for you. Hey, but
good problem.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have for sure. I'd rather that or someone green than someone come in with a lot of issues where we have to kind of take a few steps back and them be kind of baffled. Like they're Division I, they got a full scholarship to come play, and you're telling me we have to start at square one. I was like, technically we have to start at square zero, you're in pretty bad shape. I don't know if you're going to be able to play forever. So we're going to fix some things up. Hey, but we skipped one big step too, because you kind of mentioned it, like where you're working now with TC Boost, and I know you got a lot of other stuff going on, but you have a unique position there where not only are you a sports performance coach, like coaching athletes, working with a wide range from like middle school, high school, youth athletes, college, all the way to professionals that come in the facility, but you're also a sports science coordinator. So you get to kind of dabble in both, work both of those. How do you kind of balance that, or what's your guys' approach at TC Boost in and actually like implementing some of these sports science technologies with your athletes?
Yeah, so the private side, kind of just building on our conversation we were talking about before recording, and I would always get angry when I hear people talk about that on recording, what they talked about before. But now that I'm a guest, I'm in. I know what we talked about before, but just to tease the listener. But so at the private side, I'm very fortunate. I've been there on and off since 2016. And my boss is super open. He has a mechanical engineering degree. He was in the automotive industry, but he has this numerical mind as well. And he knows that I have this fascination with sports sciences. I did that at TCU for 2 years, and I just like data, the objectivity of it. And he was super open to helping me look for jobs as well when I was looking for jobs of the last 2 years. And he said, and I said, oh, I was looking for sports science jobs. And he's like, oh, well, would it help if you are a sports science coordinator? Would you want that title? And I was like, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to say no. He's like, you have to earn it, obviously. But I think basically what you're doing right now, would qualify as a sports science coordinator. So not to say that I don't earn that title, but it's interesting that when I was looking for jobs, I started hitting up every Power 5 person with quote unquote sports science in their names. And then as I got to meet and network more and more people, there's people that was doing more sports science stuff that were just called quote unquote assistant strength coaches. So I'm super grateful that my boss is open to change my title for something that I would be doing anyways. But so that's just the context of that. But basically, it's interesting in the private side, there's 4 of us and we all have kind of our own thing. So Steve, he's the director of coaching. He has his own leadership thing. Zach is a ex high school volleyball player, so he does his vert program and our jumping athletes. Tommy was an ex college football player, so he does mainly football and our NFL combine stuff. And me, I have our throwing athletes, and I just go all in on the numbers. So it's cool that I have the open space and encouragement to go all in on whatever I really want to. And we're fortunate enough that our budget is not frozen in ticket sales or just a whole other department, where my boss bought a 1080 Sprint and he wants another one. So I have a 1080 Sprint. We had force plates, a Nord board, just trials. Those ended up didn't making it through, which that's a story for a different day. But we got timing lasers, we got a jump mat, we have Team Builder to store all of our numbers and stuff. And within all of that stuff, I have full autonomy to do whatever experiments I want, to post whatever videos I want, write whatever articles I want. So it's an interesting combination of I have this wide variety of athletes and a ton of them and all of this really cool tech, and I can put together whatever I want to put together. So as a sports performance coach, that comes first. But however I can make that fit, I have full freedom to do whatever I want. So making it fit is I got to be a knockdown coach first. I got to coach all of my hours within my contract, but everything else outside of that, I get to the world is at my fingertips and my imagination.
I like it. I know you guys have, like you talked about, like kind of transitioning some technology in just to kind of trial basis and then get it out. And then you kind of kept the things that either whatever they were within your budget or you found a need for, or that you thought were going to be the most benefit. How'd you kind of go about that process? I know financially it's kind of a big thing to take on some of these technologies. And then especially like in a college setting or like a big private setting, you can't just really have one of it unless you're only doing it for testing. If you want to actually do it with a bigger group, financially being able to afford it being able to actually have someone that can run the system and know what they're doing. Like, what are kind of some of the steps that you guys took before you actually went all in and purchased some of this stuff? Obviously, like, you were kind of groomed for the sports science position too. And the joke's on you. I have sports science in my title, and
Hey,
it's not the same thing you're doing for sure. So for someone like in my position, how can we grow and figure out the best approach to start implementing more of that sports science into a strength conditioning setting?
Mhm. So first, it all starts with context and what's the goal. So I guess I'll talk a little bit of theory first, and then I'll take us through the example of the Nord board, but also the force plates. So every piece of data you collect, it's got to either be a KPI or a decision influencer. So a KPI is a key performance indicator. So a KPI is something that you are going to track over time, that is going to be your measure of success or not. Are we making progress? Are we on the right track? Et cetera, et cetera. So beyond just, are we winning more and are we staying healthier on the field more? How else am I going to measure success? So this could be sprint times, jump height, stuff like that, or a decision influencer. So more of a testing number, to phrase it another way, but to say, because of this number, I'm going to put you in this bucket or that bucket, or because of this number, I'm going to add more volume of this and less volume of that. And that's going to be an objective built into your system to help influence decisions. So those are the two main categories of buckets, I guess, that I put data in. Because just to collect it to, oh, well, maybe I'll do this or maybe I'll do that. Well, I guess I'll tease my force plate example. But then the other theory about the numbers, which is interesting because it's science and it's numbers, but it's gray, which I love, I roll, is this model of data, discussion, decision. So people fall into issues when they go right from the data to the decision. But you have to know, because of these numbers, I'm going to ask these questions, or I'm going to specifically talk to these people about these topics because of these numbers. And this is going to justify and open it that might not have been had otherwise without those numbers. And because I'm talking with those people with this goal of making these decisions, I will make those decisions. So data, discussion, decisions. So it started out with the Nord board. My boss goes, hey, I got us a 3-month trial of the Nord board for our NFL combine stuff. I'm like, oh, no way. That's sweet. So he told me that in maybe a year ago. So it was like November, and we started our combine guys January, February. So I had basically a month and a half to learn everything I could about the Nord board beforehand. I knew that it tested Nordic hamstring curls. That was basically all I knew. And I knew that we were going to use it with our NFL guys, our combine guys, with this context of speed training, very consistent with this short but big goal. So I knew a few people in my own network that had a Nord board. I sent a quote out to Strength Coach Twitter, who was open to talk shop about their Nord board and stuff. And I just hopped on the phone. I made notes, and that's where I learned what it's actually like using a Nord board versus the manual that Vald sent me. And there's value in both, but I would argue that it's more valuable to, or I guess here's an example. So I read through the manual of the Nord board, and I learned all of the metrics that it spit out. And then when I was talking with all these people, they were only talking about 2 of the 3 that it spits out. So then I was able to ask, hey, have you ever thought about XYZ that I wouldn't have asked about otherwise? And then it was interesting to hear why they don't use those numbers and things that they don't do. So you have to know the full capabilities. You have to know the textbook to then better inform your questions in your conversation to get the most value out of your conversations with other people. So I probably had 3 or 4 or 5 different phone calls with people that have Nord boards that were super open. And Jess Langvart, he's at the Jaguars, I want to say, if I'm not mistaken. They super nice guy. I think they got the first Nord board ever, like back when it was like plywood with a, like the first prototype. So that was cool to hear about. So that was like all November, December. And then we actually got it in a big cardboard box, and it was all disassembled for shipping. And it was, hey, figure it out, So I'm putting it all together, and man, my hamstrings, over the next 2 months, 3 months. Oh my gosh, because you are your own guinea pig, as we already talked about. How the heck am I supposed to coach a Nordic curl, cue it, describe it to an athlete if I don't really know what that feels like in real life? So it's funny how all of our hamstrings got stronger over the next 3 months because we had a Nord board. Whatever you test, you find important. And if you know you're going to test your hamstring strength with the Nord board, you're probably going to toss more Nordic curls in your program. So it's interesting how that works. But then it was a matter of hopping on it myself. It was creating a little PowerPoint, educating our staff on how to use it, how to set it up, the main numbers, what I learned from my phone calls with people, and then taking them through, how to set it up, how to make a profile for an athlete, the nuances of how you line up their ankles because the cuff should be vertical, and then what the number means, what number isn't important for when you're setting them up. For those that know what a Nord board is, the number of like where their knee is, kind of how far it is, that's only for the torque. That doesn't affect the force. And people mostly talk about the force number. And then knowing what asymmetry number is high, low, medium, et cetera, et cetera. But then also because I knew our end goal of, does this help us make better decisions when to continue training, when to stop training, when to take a recovery day? Should they have more eccentric hamstring work in their program for this higher level person? That also influenced my questions that I was able to ask. So long story short, we didn't use it as much as we planned, because Fridays they go out to a turf field to do all of their position drills, to practice their pro shuttles and stuff like that. And we only wanted to do our Nordics on Fridays because that's obviously very soreness inducing because it's eccentric. So long story short, it was useful, just not for the price. But then the Nord board, because we had a relationship with the Valid guy, very nice, Mike Skorup, he was like, hey, you want some force plates? And I was like, say less, let's go. So he sent us a trial, and it was the same thing. I knew that we were going to get force plates. I know we do speed work. I know we work with 9-year-olds up to pros. And it was a matter of reading the manuals, reading stuff online, just calling people specifically that I know do good force plate stuff, and people also I know specifically that have force decks. So then it was just repeating that whole process. And I'm not going to repeat verbally what that was. Phone calls, as I'm repeating it right now, not in depth. It was phone calls. It was just learning all the different ins and outs and the nuances and stuff, because I had this context, but I also had the textbook in my head. So I put that all together. We got it. I set it up. I learned it on myself. I made a coaching PowerPoint. I took my colleagues through it. We did counter movement jumps, squat jumps, isometric mid-thigh pulls, stuff like that. But where the force plates fell short was when reflecting after our 2 months was up. I said, this number or this data is great for a rainy day. And that is not the type of data that you want to be collecting and giving training economy and training time to. And I would collect these force plate numbers with my kids and say, oh, hey, can I see it? Or what's high or low? Or like, what's the point? And it's like, oh, we're just collecting. And after 2 months, that answer didn't really change. Now, it was really interesting with the dynamic strength index. So the counter movement peak force divided by the isometric mid-thigh pull peak force, what was high and low and stuff like that. But their training age is so low, we're not really going to individualize anyways. And what can 3 counter movement jumps do versus the time that it takes to set it up, the time to describe it, the time to practice it, the time to do 3 jumps that our jump mat and our timing lasers aren't going to do anyways, because we already have an extremely direct way to measure sprinting, timing lasers, and that's what we do. But then also in the private side, because it's very inconsistent training, sometimes it's inconsistent. And also they have so many outside influences that they have in their own life, sport practice, private and club. They got their private lessons. People lift at a different facility and then do speed with us. Our opportunity to really influence so I guess I'll tie back into KPIs and decision influencers. We already have more specific / simpler KPIs a jump mat, and timing lasers. And it's not going to influence that many decisions. It's not going to tweak the program that much because we don't lift that much in general. And if their training age is extremely low, we just got to get good, consistent variety of training. So that's my force plate and Nord board example. How's that sound?
I like it. Yeah, I think it's cool to hear someone go through the process of actually being interested in one of these technologies, actually having an opportunity to test it out, like educate yourself on it, reach out to other people who have had it for a period of time and still use it, and figure out what the context of how they actually implemented the program, what's actually wasted and what's actually useful information, and then come back around again, test it, and then see, does it actually work within your setting? And I think that's a big thing that a lot of people end up not doing. They either collect technology just for the sake of it, or they collect data just for a rainy day and just for the sake of it. And at the end of the day, like in my opinion, it should be simple. It should be easy to implement it into it. I don't want the technology to detract from what really needs to be done, and we need to train. And it's a little bit for the college side. I pretty much know exactly what they're doing all the time. We have so many hours with the athletes that if they're doing anything extra, like it's probably going to be some fluff, or it's going to be more sports skill stuff, and it's going to be technical, and it's probably not going to be as physically demanding. So it is helpful for me to understand, are they ready for this session? Like, are we getting the most out of our session? And like for the private sector, you were right. Like some kids are training at multiple facilities, playing multiple sports, playing for the high school team, their club team, like going to band practice, whatever else they have. Like maybe it doesn't fit that setting, but like without actually getting the information and kind of getting your hands on it, you probably would have never known. And I think that's a huge thing. And I'm definitely going to steal like the process, like the step process you had, like of actually having a decision, like before you have a decision after the data, is actually having a discussion about it. Because I think most people definitely hop right to the decision and let the technology have too much of a say in how practices or how training is dictated.
So going back to that model, in the private side, a lot more of our numbers are KPIs than decision influencers. And like I said, we already have extremely specific KPIs to what we advertise and what we do extremely well, and that's speed development. So to do like a readiness check-in, it's like, well, chances are your body's not feeling too good because you have all this other stuff going on. But we have something, for example, and this will be a data discussion decision example. So we use 95% of a PR as our threshold from Charlie Francis as a high intensity, high nervous system stimulus for getting faster. So if someone's PR is a 100, they have from a 100 to a 105 to be a high quality rep. And if someone's below 95, then it turns into that discussion. Hey, how are you feeling? What'd you do last night? You know, if it's a 6 p.m. workout and they haven't had anything since half a bagel for breakfast, well, chances are that they're not going to run that fast. But now I know that. And now I justify opening up that conversation that I might not have asked before. But now I've learned that I probably should ask how much practice they had, what they ate, how they slept, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, if they're below 95 and I say, hey, what's going on? They're like, oh, that was just off. I'm like, all right, sweet. Or if I say, hey, what's going on? They're like, you know, like this is bothering me. All right, well, I'm just going to end the speed work. We're going to go into technique work, hit the boots for some recovery, versus if I didn't have that objective model of 95%, well, maybe I have us do 3 more sprints and maybe something pops, you know, or maybe because we did that active recovery work instead of continuing to sprint, they have a better practice the next day. So that's where, but if I went right from 95 to below 95 to ending the session, well, that's probably not the smartest thing either, you know, because sometimes they could be feeling really good. It was just a bad rep, or maybe they're really into training and it's just a Monday and they did nothing for the past 2 days over the weekend and they're just a little bit asleep, or, so how you figure out what questions it can help you to ask and what it just justifies and opens up. So yeah, data discussion decision.
I like that. I've seen you post about the 95% thing too.
Super
And
passionate about it.
I think it's awesome. Like, one, to have some objective where you can continue to train the people that are falling within that zone, that feel great and want to keep going, but it opens up a discussion on both ends. If someone is actually having a bad day, like, where it's kind of like the systematic chart, like where it falls, like what's the next question, are you good, yes or no? And it'll help drive the decision so that someone that's on the high spectrum that needs to keep training can continue, and someone that doesn't need to can kind of put you in the right direction of where you should go next. And I think the other point too, like, it's not on the same topic, but it's with the 95% rule that you have, is especially for youth athletes or people that like want to get away from just always hitting a PR, like that starts to drive away from the athletes. I know you've talked about it too, like, instead of having them always focused on always improving, getting a better number, like now they have a little bit more open-ended place to get high quality training in. How has that actually worked out with like the youth athletes or people that you've used, like especially for sprint work?
Oh man, I must have accidentally sent you the article I just submitted to Simply Faster. It's almost like you know what I'm gonna say. So we call it PR-itis. It's the belief that if it's not a PR, it's a wasted training rep. And one thing that's awesome about this data availability, that we have so much tech and it's so instant and numbers are very easy to understand, is on the flip side that we are leaving the athlete's interpretation of the numbers up for whatever they make it out to be. They have all of these numbers that are so instant, but then they have their own understanding of it. So that's where a lot of PR-itis stems, and also the crazy parents, believe it or not, but their own understanding of the numbers. And they just know, was it a PR? Was it not? Was it faster or was it not? But with this objective range, we can say, hey, well, are we going to PR every day? And they all say no. But then where does this come from? So they know that we're not going to PR every day, but they don't understand what's still good that's not a PR. So it's also an awesome just education point of saying, you're not going to PR. We have all these other factors into play, and we have an objective measure of saying, hey, we're getting faster, even though it wasn't a PR. So it's gone such a long way. Like I have a 10-year-old, speaking about the youth athletes, she used to always ask, because we have a TV right at the end of the track. You went through the lasers and boom, right there, your time. She used to always just turn around and go, was that a PR? And I would say no. And she'd get all disappointed. And I talked to her about this. And then the next week, she runs through the laser. She turns around. She goes, was that within my range? And how cool is that? That she's 10 and that she has this better idea, the story she's telling herself about progress, the process of progress, and what getting faster really looks like. And she goes, oh yeah, I played for 3 different soccer teams this past weekend. And I'm like, dude, oh my gosh. And she only plays soccer at 10 years old. So PR-itis and 95%, it's been one of the most effective tools to help combat that. But I guess next, kind of the daily readiness. This is always my fun fact. So my mentor and I, he's all anecdote and applied. And I must say, he does reel me in a lot because I can get crazy with the numbers, but he always asks, what's the point? Is this going to flow in the session? How are the athletes going to feel about, so I give him a lot of credit, but he always drops these little offhand comments and anecdotes. And then I'm like, wait, I want to know if that's true or not. So there was one day, he just commented on the 95 and that he doesn't see that many kids actually below 95. I was like, oh, I want to know. So I pulled every flying 10 and 5:15. So it's our top speed sprint and our acceleration sprint. If they had at least 4 times, I calculated their basically running PR and then what that rep was of their PR, the percent of that. And if you had to guess, of my 9-year-olds up to college athletes, and I guess we had a few pro, what percent of the time they're under 95%. So basically, if someone does 100 sprints on average, guys, girls, all age range, how many of those would be under 95% of their best?
I would say the other 5%.
5% of the time? 11.
Okay.
So most people would guess, with this context of the private side, oh, probably like 40% of the time they're under, with all the sport practice and all this stuff. Only 11% of the time. So it's so interesting that basically and there's some kids that were never, and there's some kids that were more, but with all these outside influences, all the different sport practices, they have to come in and train at 8 o'clock at night after waking up at 6:30 a.m. for school. All of these things, let alone puberty and all that stuff, that's just really interesting with just growth spurts and whatnot, that we can very consistently hit 95% or better of our best. And then that opens up the conversation of, well, if there's all these suboptimal factors and we're at 95 to like 97, 98, well, what happens if we align 2 more of those factors? We get our sleep right and you have a snack before the session. Oh, well, what happens if you don't condition your own for an hour on Sundays when we have a Monday workout? So it's just been this huge, awesome conversation starter, athlete education piece that helps me check in with my athletes and make better decisions. It's objective, but it doesn't lead right to the decisions.
No, it's a great point. And I think it's cool to have someone like your mentor be able to kind of check you and make sure that you're not going down a rabbit hole that doesn't have a purpose in mind. But it's pretty cool to see like athletes start to buy into the process and everything that you're trying to teach them and educate them on, and then slowly start to change their ways a little bit more just based off the feedback that you give them. And that was one of the big topics I wanted to talk to you about, because you, like, in the private sector, and like I think more people should take advantage of it. Like, there is you've said it before, there's a very entrepreneurship that you have to kind of have. It's very different. I know you've worked in the college setting, you've also worked in the private sector, and the big difference, like the glaring difference between the two, is college sector, you're given your clients, your athletes. The private sector, you have to kind of market and bring them in because that's where your money comes from. College, they show up and that's it. So the big thing, like, I think is huge, is the education side. And you do a lot of your own education personally, like from your website, from your social media, from your YouTube as well. But I'm interested, like, with all the education that you kind of put out, how much of that are you kind of either utilizing those topics specifically to maybe drive conversation for the week with your athletes, or are you kind of redirecting parents or coaches too, so that when maybe they only see you for a few sessions a week, you can still kind of have an impact with them? So hopefully it influences their training decisions when they actually do come back to you. Like, how much have you either thought about that, or do you like kind of target your educational topics to those clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one thing that I'm extremely passionate about, that I can go too far on the other end of sometimes, is I enjoy giving, I can over explain because I want to give my athletes the tools of autonomy. I want them to be able to make their own decisions, because, and so let's say they have 10 sessions a week between practice, lifting, and us. Well, I get 2, so I get a fifth of their sessions. If I can give them the tools and educate them, well, instead of affecting 20% of their training week, I can affect 100%. If I teach them how to do a better warm-up, if I teach them how to time their rest in between their sprints, not that I'm a nutritionist, but if I give them tips on pre-snacks, stuff like that, then I can affect 100% of it as opposed to just 20%. So this idea of giving autonomy, I think, is something that I'm extremely passionate about. Now, with my content, it's a little bit more geared towards coaches, but I've recently started shifted kind of more towards both. I'm super open to, if an athlete expresses some interest, oh, I have this video, and I'll send them a link to my YouTube video, or if I have a podcast topic. But as any professional knows, like, our field is extremely niche. And there's some athletes that eat up everything I say, and some athletes are like, oh, here he goes again. He's back on his 95% talk. So a lot of it I do in the moment, but I am super open to sharing those resources, even though it is made a little bit more kind of towards coaches. But giving your athletes the tools of autonomy, I think is one of the most powerful things that you can do.
Yeah, I would agree. I try to do the same thing because for in the college setting too, and the private sector has got to be the same way to a certain degree. You're going to see there's going to be some attrition, and you might have a few 8-year-olds like when you get like older, and that you'll see like maybe go on to college and go on to professional, and that you've had over the course of their entire like career athletically. College, you're only going to see them 1 to 5 years, like if that. So what are they going to do after it? And I know private sector is interesting because a good coach would say exactly what you're saying. Like, I want to give them autonomy. At some point in time, they're not going to need my service, and that's all right, because I did my job and I educated them. I gave them all the tools that they need. Maybe the only thing they need left is just a facility to use, and then like to catch up. But in the college setting, like, I know it's finite, so I want to rush and try to get them all that information so they can have autonomy, because what are they going to do when they're done? And if they can't, I feel I did a disservice if my athletes can't write some sort of program, or at least be educated on how to execute movements properly. Maybe not be a coach or be able to like write full programs, but at least have an active lifestyle and still be able to train and do things properly when their career is over. Private setting, like, that's your clients though, but you're going to get new ones. But I completely agree. Like, having that autonomy is huge because it's empowering to them as well.
Mm-hmm. And believe it or not coaches everywhere are the best. So let's say they go to a college that doesn't have a strength coach, or where it's not the best strength coach. They know how to take themselves through a really good warm up. They know the coaching cues of XYZ. They know how to take care of their body after the workout. So there's so many factors, and being an athlete as well. I think that's huge, and they might not realize it or appreciate it in the moment. But when that athlete comes back and goes, oh, this weekend I did XYZ, or I didn't do XYZ because of what we talked about, I feel amazing. It's such a good feeling. Such a good feeling.
Athlete sounds a lot better than like NARP. Yeah.
The athletes.
Yeah, I like that. Hey, so we kind of talked about education for athletes and what you kind of do to provide them, and all the stuff that you do on the side. Obviously, like, you talked about it, like, you're doing all the educational content, you're doing your YouTube channel, you host your own podcast, the Talking Shop podcast as well. But how other ways are you actually like kind of continuing to educate yourself and sharpen the sword outside of all these other adventures? I know the big one too, like, your networking and you reaching out to coaches is huge. Like, what advice would you have someone that's maybe either new to the profession, like trying to break in and kind of like build colleagues and support, and then like what kind of research or sort of outside continued education are like your go-tos?
Yeah, so this was an interesting question that was asked to me previously by some of our interns we had over the summer. And I was talking to my mentor about it, and I was like, I have enough books on my bookshelf that I bought that I have not read yet, as I'm sure most coaches do. And I have all of these emails that I emailed, articles and stuff to myself that I put in my to consume, folder in my email. Shamelessly admitting that. But he said, dude, you do the most of any of us, like all the coaches you talk to and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, I guess that is true. And it's one thing to read about it. So here's a perfect example. I was reading the Certified Performance Sports Science textbook, CPSS, from the NSCA. And I knew one of the co-authors of the Force Plate chapter. So I literally texted him and I said, hey, is this you? He's like, yeah. I was like, no way. great chapter. I have a few questions. Can we hop on Zoom? So we hopped on Zoom. We talked about fourth place for an hour. But I'd met him through looking for jobs and stuff. But so go right. If there's something you really want to know about, go right to the source. It's so crazy that you would never give out your phone number, but there is my Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, email, LinkedIn, probably another app I can't think of. There's 5 different ways beyond my phone number that I would be more than happy to give out that you can just find on the internet that can make my phone pop up with your name. So it's a push and a pull, but you can definitely push. So with this networking idea in mind, you have to have an objective, and not in a bad way, but you have to have a goal. So for me, it was looking for jobs, and it was Power 5 sports scientists. And then that led me down this huge giant rabbit hole. And then all these people that I had met, I knew their background, their experience, what tech they had, where they wanted to go in their own careers, their own personal interests and stuff like that. And I might or might not have a pretty built out Excel sheet of all of these conversations I've had that you might be on. But then if there's a specific topic, I know who I can hit up, or if I read an article, I know someone that knows someone else. It's so crazy. Like all of the people that I was told to follow as an intern in 2016, that each of my 2 bosses have had phone calls with before, that they could just text me their number right away. So have a goal. Like if I just hit up, like, I don't know, Duncan French, because he's obviously one of the best in the world, just because he seems like a smart guy and I could learn something. Well, that's extremely vague. But I'm a speed coach. I work with high school athletes, to mostly high school athletes. And I want to hit up, let's say, like Chris Corfus, because he's the speed guy. Or if I want to hit up a Les Spellman. It's one thing to say, like, if anyone's listening to this, do not send a message that says, let me pick your brain, because I have done that and I've gotten those and it does not work. If you say, hey, I do X, I know you do Y, and I have a very specific question about Z, they're probably going to respond. So help them help you by having a goal, a very specific question, and things you want to talk. Now, the conversation can go anywhere, but like if I asked you, hey, I want to get better at lacrosse, or I have a lacrosse athlete starting up on Monday, how do I train lacrosse kids? You can be like, oh, like I guess I could teach you how to do that. But if I said, hey, I got a midi, they have been training for a year or 2, they have a really hard issue with their role, and their strength is fine, but like, where do I go from there? You're going to eat that up. I'm setting you up for a home run right there. So have a very specific goal, why you're reaching out to them, and then just send it and be a human and have a genuine conversation. It's not to say that a job will come out from it or that something great and grand, but if they say, hey, you seem like a good dude, my buddy is also really passionate about this, I'll send his number your way. And then it snowballs and snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. So I think that there is so much to be said about networking, not ironically, actually going out and do it. But if you follow that formula of, I'm hitting them up for X because I personally do Y, and here's my very specific question that aligns with X and Y, that's my Z, that's a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll piggyback off that too. Another thing not to do when you're sending internship resumes in is spell people's name wrong and not tell me why you're actually sending me your shit.
Love it.
Put another actual email in there.
Get your Mr. and Mrs. right. So I was applying for a job at Stanford, and I knew someone at USC. They're actually the first person I ever hit up, which is crazy how it all comes around. And I said, hey, do you know anyone at Stanford? Because they're both Pac-12. And he goes, oh yeah, I know her. And then their name was Sam something. I'm like, oh. And he was like, and she deletes every email that starts with Mr. And when I was applying to Clemson, Ryan Metzger is a girl or a woman. Ryan Metzger. And good thing I looked up just Ryan Metzger, Clemson, on the internet. And the first picture that popped up was her. And I said, oh my gosh, good thing I did that. So do your homework before, give them no reason to delete your message, and give them a reason to respond with how you phrase it. Set them up for success to help you.
Yeah. And watch spell check. I know for sure I spelled someone's name wrong because spell check messed me up.
Oh
And that's
man,
not how they spell their name. So yeah, just
Bill
be a
Gates,
human.
come on.
Just think it out. But I like that XYZ approach, and actually being mindful with what you're doing, being mindful with the person's time that you're reaching out. Like, they're doing you a favor, you're asking them to do a favor, but the least you could do is actually be a good person going forward, reach out to them the right way, and actually bring something interesting to the table and something specific in mind, rather than keep it super vague and say, I want to pick your brain.
Yeah.
And that's another one I kind of do. I should probably fix, but every time I go on the road, it's like, you guys want to talk shop? It's like,
So that's a little different. Like if you're there and there's
I'm
this
in
common
town.
theme. Yeah, if you're both in the Mountain West and you're not in the Mountain West anymore, but um if you're both there, you're both professionals, it kind of makes sense versus if there's some random dude who just graduated who's hitting you up on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So there's definitely context and nuance, but I've made that mistake plenty of times with myself. Not to say never do that, but hey, we're at the same conference. Can I get you lunch after? I'd love to talk about X. But going back to people's time, so it's one thing to say, hey, can I have an hour of your time? Tell me all about training lacrosse kids versus I understand you're really busy. Do you have 20 minutes? Here are my two really specific questions. And if it turns into 45, great. If it turns into 20, great. So there's people that are more or less open, but I think that's also a great point that chances are if they're hit up worthy, they're probably busy people. So
Yeah.
just be conscious of that as well.
Yeah. And that's a good approach too, because if I guarantee if someone said 20 minutes to me and it was a topic that I like to talk about or is interesting or the conversation was good, it's probably going to exceed that time just because it's actually a genuinely good conversation, rather than you called just to listen to what's essentially a lecture, and on the other end of the phone is silence. Like, there's got to be some back and forth to it, and you have to actually have a little bit of knowledge into the topic you're asking a question about, and that's necessary.
Because I've had those phone calls that go on for 3 hours and my AirPods die. And I'm like, oh, BRB, we just keep going and going and going. And I've also had those talks that are 30 minutes and I'm like, holy crap, can this be done, please? But I think what's been so valuable for me being full-time now for over a year is I actually have something to contribute to the conversation, because it's one thing to have really good questions. You can speak on textbook theory, but when to say, oh, they answer your question and you're like, oh my gosh, no, I saw something pretty similar, da da da. And they ask you a question and it goes back and forth. So you have to bring something to the table, and just having like stories and something just to go back and forth on. The really bad conversations I've had, it's just me like interviewing them and they just give brief answers. They don't ask anything back, but then also I don't really give anything to them to respond. But then I've had multiple with the same person, 2+ hours, and it's just great. And we're just going back and forth, and it's just a great time. And chances are, if you follow that format, because you do X and I do Y, you'll have something to bring to the table. So I think that's huge. And be open. Like, I've also fallen into the trap where it's only about them, but they're humans too, like, feel free to talk about yourself a little bit. And it is interesting, that moment when it does switch to them turning it back on you. Sometimes it happens within the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Sometimes it doesn't happen until 25 minutes into the chat where they go, oh, tell me about yourself, or how about X? And then it's great. But definitely give them success by making it a back and forth.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I stole from your model that too, because I was pretty organized, like, with at least who I knew in the profession or who I've met, but maybe not to the degree that you had your like networking kind of tree laid out. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have. I think some people would look on and be like, well, you're just collecting information so that you can leverage it down the line. It's like, no, I'm trying to remember things, because even though this is a very small community, like, people switch jobs all the time. People are in different professions. People know are a few degrees of separation from someone else. It's in my best interest to kind of keep up with those things so that I can continue the conversation. If you're going to be reaching out to such a wide range of people, like it's nice to still stay in the loop, even though we're so busy. Like you have to find a way to still be able to like recall previous conversations or reach back on something else. So yeah, I do the same exact thing in doing that. And I think that's how like I started for my career because I was at a D3 school and all I did was like, I want to be in lacrosse. I want to be a Division I and I want to see what it's about. And all I did was fire off like 30 emails or 30 like emails to reach out to people just to kind of get a gauge what it was like. And then after that, I did the same thing. I threw out like 30 DVDs that are terrible. If anybody has their hands on those, throw them away. But I mean, it landed my like first internship outside of like my alma mater. And I've always enjoyed doing stuff like this and going to conferences and not going to the presentations, but going to like sit at a bar and talk to 5 coaches I've known for 10 years and 5 coaches I just met 5 minutes ago. That it's by far my favorite thing to do.
I will admit that sometimes it can feel a little inauthentic. And I did make a podcast episode explaining my Excel sheet and I was like, am I exposing myself? But then it's like, I want to provide as much value to this relationship as possible, because if they have all this knowledge, if they have all the connections, if my value is bringing organization, then do everything you can to be organized. You know, if you say, hey, you know, I'm really busy, we're in the middle of season, we're done in the middle of December, I'm going to make a note of that. And I'm going to hit you up in the middle of December. Or when you say, oh, you know, I got a 2 and a 4-year-old, instead of just saying, hey, are you free? I'm going to say, hey, how are your kids doing? You know, like if you have an hour, I'd love to catch up. Well, which one are you more likely to respond to? You know, so as long as it always comes from a very genuine place and you're maximizing everything you can do on your end to bring value to them, because we all know why they can bring value. That's why you're hitting them up. So set yourself up for success to be the most valuable person possible to make them want to talk to you. So staying organized, and I'm sure most of your listeners probably love Excel, but yeah, just talking shop, hitting people up, like just getting lost in a good conversation with good people. It goes a long way.
Oh yeah. It's the 21st century Rolodex now. It's a great tool to have. And especially with the amount of people that you end up meeting through the profession, or the people that come and go from it too. Like I can't imagine a better way. And my memory's terrible. So anything that helps like kind of get my foot back in the door and start that conversation, like not from square one again, and kind of pick up where we left off, I'm going to use those tools to remind myself and not necessarily be like inauthentic with it, for sure.
Trying to restart that convo about kids and like experience, and like it's annoying. So yeah, I like not having to restart is huge.
For sure. Hey, so like any good training session, we end the show with a good finisher. So I got
good finisher.
Oh yeah. So I got 4 quarters, 4 questions, and maybe overtime for you. So
oh man, this is not on what you emailed me. Oh my gosh.
No, so we can go rapid fire and you can answer them as quick as you want, or you can take your time with them and we can drag them out. I'm okay with that too, but you ready?
I'm clearly short-winded, so we'll see how this goes.
All right, we'll see how it goes. Hey, so first one I got for you: biggest influence in the coaching profession and biggest influence in or favorite athlete in baseball.
My biggest influence is my mentor, Steve Breitenstein. He's been huge on just challenging what I believe in. And he is the most, not controversial in a bad way, but like what he does makes sense and it goes against the grain, but only because it makes the most sense. So just challenging, keeping me honest, but also he's just a knockdown speed coach. So I've just learned so much from him, and just career-wise, and because he's in with Jeremy Boone, he's doing leadership stuff as well. And just like to have, like, I call him literally a cheat code and the wizard, depending on the day. And to have someone like that at my point in my career, I literally couldn't imagine not. So I'm extremely grateful for him. But athlete wise, I really like what Trevor Bauer does. I know he's made some ripples in the news recently, but this idea of engineering his body and literally being the mad scientist of baseball. And then also Bryson DeChambeau. I'm not the biggest golfer, probably because I'm just complete not good at it. But just these people that are numbers make sense. They can help me get better. I'm going to learn everything I can about that sport and optimizing it. So that's what I'm going to do. And now that's becoming a little bit more mainstream. But I think the guys that are pushing the boundaries, and it's cool and it makes sense, and it's just it gets my brain going. So probably Trevor and Bryson.
I like it. Hey, so we talked about it before. You've got a lot of stuff going on that you do outside, like the four walls of the weight room. But when you're not coaching and training, what are some of your other go-to hobbies?
Hobbies I would like to pick up. I'll probably start there. So I'd love to play more beach volleyball because I know it so well. I just absolutely suck at it. So I think joining a pickup rec league would be fun. I'd love to play pickup basketball. I've always enjoyed playing that. I've just never had hops. And then my twin brother's actually a college bowler. So bowling is kind of my family's thing because my parents are old, but anyone can bowl. So I'm pretty okay. My best is a 242. So I think to give a little bit more consistent efforts to bowling would be pretty cool. I'm a freelance videographer. So it's crazy how what turned into me just enjoying watching YouTube videos in COVID turned into I want to learn how to do that, which turned into me meeting the president of 1080 Motion of North America when looking for jobs to, hey, do you want to make a video for TC Boost? I see you have a YouTube channel, to 5 more marketing videos later that has gotten me flown across the country. And because I'm in a videography, I also have a drone, which is pretty cool. So all these things I wish I could devote a little bit more time to, but a few sports I'd like to try. I like making videos. So
there you go. I like it. Hey, if you've given any other thought, what do you think you would be doing if you weren't in your current profession right now?
Great question. And this is something I actually have thought a lot about because I guess this is kind of a hobby, or not really a hobby, but I would be a financial advisor. I love money and investing, and I'm into crypto. I'm not crazy, but like my Fidelity, I check way too much. I love going on Yahoo Finance, and just when something's not on the line in a bad way, but like money's real. And by learning more stuff, you can make more money. And I don't know, just business, money, investing, like all that stuff I just really enjoy. So I'd definitely be a financial advisor. That's a good question.
That's the entrepreneur in you.
How about yourself?
I don't know. I've thought about it a bunch. I mean, my go-to before I even knew I wanted to be a coach was to join the military. All my family did that. I kind of got disqualified for my eyesight like way back in the day. And at that point, I was pretty discouraged. I was like, I guess I'll go to college. And I thought I was going to do athletic training, and found out like day one that was not for me, and walked past the weight room and kind of fell in love with coaching after that. So I don't know what I would like to do. I wish I knew how to. People have given this answer a lot. People want to be cooks, and being a chef would be pretty cool, but I definitely don't want to touch dishes. And I don't know if I have the patience to learn all that again. So I don't know. I'd have to think about it a lot more, because I know my dad's getting close to retirement age from being in the military for 31 years now, 32.
Wow.
So he's thinking the same thing. And I don't even want to think about what I would be doing if it wasn't coaching yet, but should probably start that so I don't end up 32 years into it and be like, what am I doing next? So
chasing kids around till you're 60. That'd be impressive.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Not many people retire as a coach. Like my old boss would say, there's not too many that you can say retire as a coach. So maybe having something in the back pocket for that interests you later down the line is probably a useful tool, not to have an escape, but to at least understand that there's something after it for sure. Because 60, I don't know how well it is to relate to 18-year-old freshman when you're 60. I don't want to be the back in my day person.
Oh, I'm that now at 25, coaching 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. And it is awful for my mental health and my quarter life crisis going back in my day when I was your age. I'm like, what is going on with me right now?
Oh, it's a weird feeling for sure. Hey, so if you're setting up an ideal training day for yourself and maybe TC Boost is shut down and it's just you, what is your go-to either PR song or training music? And what does your post-training meal look like?
Ooh, okay. So my workout playlist, it's a combination of rap like Kevin Gates and low key. I never thought I'd be into it, but like metal, not screaming like Skillet. It's like hard. I like how would you describe Skillet?
Dad rock.
Dad rock.
Or
yeah, so it's like
radio quote unquote metal.
Yeah, so it's like it's not screamo, but it's like hard. So there's like Invincible by Skillet. I like that one. I Don't Get Tired by Kevin Gates. If I had to put on one for a PR, probably I Don't Get Tired by Kevin Gates, just the first thing coming off the top of my head, or something by Skillet for sure. And then post-training meal, probably hit up either Portillo's or Chipotle. And those that don't know what Portillo's is, it's in the Midwest in California, I want to say. Have you ever been?
It's not a sandwich shop, is it?
It's like a burger, hot dog, salad place.
I don't think I have.
Well, so their bacon cheeseburgers are sweet, and they got this thing called chocolate cake shake. So they put a piece of chocolate cake in a cup and then like ice cream and stuff, and then they blend it up.
That's dangerous.
So I mean, you got to restore those glycogen stores somehow. So got to do what you got to do.
It's not a bad way to do it. I like it. Hey, last one I got for you for overtime. What does training and competing mean to you?
Training, competing is it's an embodiment. It's an expression of you. You're putting in all of your time and effort and your thoughts and your beliefs and training towards this goal, and then it's all manifesting into this display of it. So it's an expression of you. It's an accumulation of everything you're able to put together. So I won't try to rephrase that. I feel like that was pretty okay.
No, I like it. It's definitely a question that I've been thinking about a lot, especially like you talked about like the athlete and actually coming out of your college life and like stepping into a coaching career for yourself too. Like that changes your training and your competition level. It changes, but you're still deeply embedded in it, and it's just taking a different form of itself. But no, I like that. That's awesome to hear. But hey, for anybody else, obviously we talked about it. You've got a lot of educational information. You got a lot of stuff going on. How can people follow up with you, follow what you got going on, and ask any questions they have for you other than your telephone number?
Fantastic. So I'm always down to talk shop, but please do not pick my brain. Come with specific questions, knowing that I have this speed development background. I have my sports science interests and stuff like that, just to follow my own advice. But at Coach Big Toe, so Coach Bigtoe, it's my license plate to play on my last name. That's on Instagram and Twitter. That's just I'm on those way too much. I'm trying to get my YouTube up to 1,000 subscribers. So that's just Matt Tometz. That would definitely mean a lot. But yeah, IG and Twitter is the most direct way. I check it multiple times a day. So yeah, reach out, speed, numbers, networking, job stuff, anything in between. Let's do it.
There you go. Yeah, it's a great resource for anybody looking to learn just about anything. The podcast is awesome. Obviously,
the Talking Shop podcast. Yes.
Yes, there you go. Because that's where I got my first start. I picked your brain a little bit for that one for sure. And we first got to know each other from the Samson one, so I'm thankful for all that stuff too. But hey man, this has been great from starting it off and before the show with the pre-recording and everything going on. It's good to catch up, man. And I'm glad you're doing well. And I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you for having me. And it's cool to see that what started from our simple conversation that is manifested into your podcast. So I'm excited to see where it takes you. And this was awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. It's good to finally get you on too.
Boom.
Awesome there.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.